Lightgun was made in 2021 by Arcade Europe. It is a PC-compatible light gun which relies on infrared light. After a failed Kickstarter campaign in 2020, initial sale began in 2021 via an also unsuccessful Indiegogo campaign. Since the very beginning, the behavior of Arcade Europe led to widespread controversy. Because this is not a drama channel, the review portion will not address any of these specific concerns, which are put to the end of the video, labeled with a timestamp for those who are interested. Arcade Europe produces emulation-based home arcade cabinets. It was founded by Andrew Devine, a UK citizen who operates the company in the Czech Republic. Arcade Europe initially used Ultimarc Aimtrak light guns. Due to claimed dissatisfaction with those controllers and the goal to better mimic the sensation of using real firearms, development of the AE Lightgun started. The gun looks quite cool and reminds me a lot of the Nerf Fortnite HC-E. The shell has quite some give to it, due to being made of flexible nylon 6.6. The controller rattles if shaken. All edges but the ones at the display are very dull and look like they have been sandblasted too much. The grip piece lacks a thumb cutout and isn't very comfortable. For an adult hand it's too small. For some reason, Arcade Europe decided to not route the cable via its dedicated hole in the back, and instead omits the heel button and routes the cable through there, which looks goofy. There, the cable is just held by a knot and by extension hot glue, which internally holds the used USB micro-B cable jack in the socket on the board. Generally, lots of hot glue was used, and when my controller arrived, it was covered in hot glue spider webs, as nobody deemed it necessary to clean the gun prior shipping. It's ambitious to say that the AE Lightgun had sides, because of the off-putting front side. The front pole is flat and super wide. The backside is taller, and thus the player has to angle the gun up when attempting alignment. I put it as attempting, because there is no front pole which fits into the V cutout in the backside. The gap in the plastic is slightly bigger at the front side, and thus one can try to align the slit with the backside, effectively yielding something like a two backsides line of sight, if the groove in the front side wouldn't be so narrow and uneven. Arcade Europe planned an optional red dot sight accessory which would attach into recesses on the sides of the gun. Sadly, this accessory seemingly wasn't released. Most buttons were placed on the left-hand side. The button closest to the nozzle is mapped to the right click. Sadly, it is recessed way further down compared to the other buttons. It reminds me of purposefully hard to press buttons on other controllers, such as power or pair buttons. I cannot understand why Arcade Europe chose to make the most important button challenging to press. The button in the middle of the gun is mapped to the middle mouse button. The row of buttons to the right is mapped to the number keys 1 to 4. The two buttons at the hammer are mapped to arrow up and arrow down. As already mentioned, the button at the heel was left away. The button at the trigger guard stops tracking. If the trigger is pressed after the trigger guard button, the calibration wizard is launched. All the buttons and the trigger are push button switch based. Apparently, Arcade Europe struggled to find suitable ports and wasn't able to compensate for dimensions with the shell design. As a consequence, the stems of the push-button switches were manually cut down, which might be an explanation for the widely varying key feeling among buttons. The screen on the side of the gun shows which button is pressed in full text. Sadly, not much care for alignment was put in my unit and the screen is screwed notably. The clicky trigger feels nice if a bit spongy. Sadly, as the PCB is just laid onto thin, flexible nylon posts and not secured by screws whatsoever, the trigger moves the whole PCB around and is able to backwards engage the arrow down button if pressed hard enough. As there is no user-facing software for the gun, the buttons can't be remapped. Any remap needs have to be satisfied in the games themselves or have to be funneled through third-party applications. Functionally, the AE Lightgun works like a Nintendo Wii remote as it pays attention to two IR light sources in order to track movement. In fact, both systems use the same exact Pixart multi-object tracking engine sensor. My unit was delivered with a generic third-party Wii-style reference points light bar, but just like with the Wii, a variety of light sources can be used. Compared to the Nintendo Wii and many other systems, which also rely on the mod sensor, the player is limited in the choice of light sources when using the AE Lightgun though, as here the sensor sensitivity can't be adjusted. For calibration, the mouse cursor is moved to 2 locations, where it must be shot before tracking resumes. In my tests, a minimum distance of 3 screen diagonals must stand between the player and the screen in order to yield unusable tracking. If the distance was any shorter than that, I experienced triangle-shaped dead zones at the corners, in which the gun isn't tracking. This was a huge surprise to me, as I usually associate dead zones with bad quality CRT light guns that don't get the timings right. When aiming into those dead zones, the AE Lightgun will roll over the cursor position to a new location. The cursor position will also roll over regularly, no matter the distance, if the player aims off-screen. This is more distracting as it sounds, because in some instances the cursor will not just change the position, but also the direction. For example, aiming too far right horizontally will be picked up as cursor movement in the far left, but vertically. For me, the most common error was aiming into a dead zone at either of the left-hand side corners, which moves the cursor along the top edge near the mid of the screen. When tracking works, the precision is good, but the accuracy is mediocre at best. This is under optimal conditions, standing far away from the screen, always keeping the same angle and distance. Just as any 2-point reference light system, accuracy will suffer tremendously if angle and distance are changed, relative to how they were during calibration. This is a matter of course and can't be remedied by magic. To get the AE Lightgun to its peak accuracy, much care has to be put into the calibration process, as for the lack of a graphical user interface, calibration parameters can't be tweaked manually. Compared to other 2-point systems, the AE Lightgun is more difficult to calibrate because it is less forgiving concerning the placement of the reference lights. Using a laser and a high-speed camera, I measured the latency of the AE Lightgun to be 87 milliseconds. As a comparison, the Ultimarc Aimtrak yielded a latency of just 18 milliseconds when using the same instruments. Personally, I was disappointed with the AE Lightgun. My biggest issue was the lack of proper sights, which made me unconfident when attempting precise shots in games with hostage scenarios. Despite his claims, I have a hard time believing Andrew was a firearms enthusiast when he chose to put those sights onto the shell. I wish the final production model would have been closer to the early prototype, which had way better looking sights and had cutouts in the grip. As it is now, the grip is blocky and uncomfortable to hold. The form-over-function placement of the buttons is also a big letdown to me, not to speak of the poor button feeling and inconsistency. With its €125 price tag, the AE Lightgun costs a 30% premium over the standard Ultimarc Aimtrak and is more expensive still than the advanced model with force feedback upgrade. I make this comparison as Andrew's dissatisfaction with the Aimtrak gun is the claimed origination of the project. Even in a world without Aimtrak, I don't think €125 would be a good deal, given the lackluster performance, the amateurish build quality, and the abundance of competitor projects. If you want a low-cost PC light gun, get Lichtknarre. If you want something mid-class, get Aimtrak. And if you seek perfection, get Gun for IR or the Sinden light gun. The box looks subtle but nice. It's made of very thin and fragile dark grey cardboard. Besides a glossy logo on top, the box lacks any markings. Inside are layers of foam with cavities to host the controller and the generic Wii knockoff bar. Sadly, the package lacks a manual. With the main review out of the way, I will now discuss why there's controversy around Arcade Europe and its light gun. At the time of the first Kickstarter, all original videos strongly indicated that the controller was gyro or accelerometer based. To enthusiasts, the talking points on the campaign page also suggested such a sensor principle. Arcade Europe wrote of a sensitivity setting, a center calibration button, the gun's ability to be impartial towards sunlight, and claimed the product wasn't relying on a camera or sensor bar. After being challenged about this choice in internet forums and such, given the inherent drawbacks of the gyro technology, Arcade Europe claimed that the AE Lightgun wasn't gyro-based. To me it seems Andrew pulled out, but at this time couldn't tell truthfully that he changed his mind about which sensor technology to use. This behavior left behind unchanged claims which turned into untrue promises. Arcade Europe's communication within the internet community to me seemed aggressive and bully-like. The pattern of making claims, changing mind, leaving claims to become untrue repeated over and over again. When I ordered my current AE Lightgun, their own website still proudly proclaimed that the system doesn't rely on a sensor bar, possibly because for a brief time Arcade Europe shifted towards using adhesive light dots like the design I have published. But as you have seen, my AE Lightgun came shipped with a generic V knockoff sensor bar. Based on how Arcade Europe teased upcoming developments, it was theorized in the community that Andrew might looked into using Samuel Ballantyne's Samco codebase without permission. Whether this is true or not, the way Arcade Europe speaks of infrared light gun technology, confusing the mod sensor with a camera and calling the reference light source a sensor, suggests that they don't understand the principle, which of course makes it difficult to engineer and build such a project. As I recall it, as controversy grew, Andrew started to deny that he was the author of past posts and claims. To me, it seems Andrew struggles to write in his own mother tongue. I don't make fun of it. Very intelligent and successful personalities such as Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs do so too. This challenge, however, gives text a unique quality, a fingerprint if you will, and a lot of posts I recall being denied authorship of have this style. Arcade Europe's main sale argument for the light gun is it being the world's only genuine plug-and-play light gun on the market. Apart all other plug-and-play light guns like the gun for IR and the Storm Light Gun X FPS, which Andrew could claim he doesn't know of, there are of course the Ultimarc Aimtrak and its 2010 Harbor OEM variant. Arcade Europe used Aimtrak guns in their cabinets and sold them to their customers. These guns are just as plug-and-play as the AE Lightgun is. Yes, the Aimtrak comes with software which allows remapping the buttons and upgrading the firmware, but this program isn't needed to run the controller whatsoever. Part of the controversy regarding the AE Lightgun is the bad availability. I tried to rent or buy a unit for 2 years and 5 months straight. My order was cancelled several times, one of which I wasn't paid back the money. It took me considerable effort to get my payment back, and after that, Arcade Europe wrote me an email in which I feel they tried to insult me. It appears I'm not the exception. An individual in my comment section had his order cancelled and allegedly wasn't refunded the full payment. This is the end of the review. My name is Ben. I thank you for viewing.